Hey everyone, it's Jenny from the WOW Creative team. I hope you're having a wonderful day. In today's video, I'm going to be showing you how I created these two cards. They both feature WOW's Glintz embossing powders, which I'll give you a close-up look at in a minute, but they also feature watercolor and a little trick that I learned from Jana Smakula on a recent video she did, and I just wanted to try it out. So these are the three Glintz embossing powders that I have in my stash. I have Oyster Glintz, Rose Glintz and Mayan Glintz. There's also Aztec Glintz and there may be another couple. And you can see I've created the sample swatch on the top, so you can see the subtle differences in the colours once they're heat embossed. Oyster is a kind of pale creamy colour, and the other two are almost kind of sandy rose colours. And I'm going to be using the Mayan and the Rose Glintz in my projects today. So to start off with, I have a panel of cold press watercolor cardstock, and I'm going to be heat embossing onto this using the Glintz powders. I'm starting off by treating the cardstock with a powder tool just to remove any static cling, so that when I emboss, the powders doesn't go where I don't want it. And I'm inking up my stamp with WOW embossing ink. This stamp is one I've had in my stash for a while and just haven't used. It's by Concord and 9th. It's called All My Love, and it's a really sweet image. It's a heart made up of different florals. So once I've stamped, and I do stamp twice just because of that rough texture on cold press watercolor cardstock, I'm using arches. I then am going to apply my powder. I like to use a coffee filter just to catch the powder and then heat it up. I've sped it up here, and this is the Rose Glintz. I thought that would be nice for this heart, perfect timing for Valentine's Day. And while I'm at it, I'm going to heat emboss my other image. This is the Santana Rose from Gina Designs. I've treated my cardstock. I'm using the same watercolor cardstock with a powder tool again, and this time I'm going to heat emboss it with Mayan Glintz. And you may think these look very similar. They are relatively similar, but you'll see when I hold them both up together that they are subtly different. And they're sort of, it's hard to explain the Glintz powders. I like to use them for watercolouring in place of white embossing powder or gold or silver. They are kind of like a pale, translucent colour with a sheen, like a gold or silvery sheen shot through. And you can see on the left the Mayan, and on the right the Rose. That Rose is definitely pinker. So I'm just going to show you how I watercolour my first image. This is the Spring Garden watercolour brush markers set from Altenew. And I've been practicing with these a little bit recently. They're a little bit different to what I'm used to with, say, my Zig Clean Colour Reel brush markers. Once you apply them down, you really have to get that water on straight away. Otherwise, they're a little bit harder to move. So the best trick I've found that works for me is to go and do each section, and I'm showing this in real time, and then add the water as you go. So I like to draw a line along the area that would be darkest directly to the cardstock with the brush marker, and then come in with a fine watercolor brush, just clean water, and then pull it out and fade it out towards the outer edge. I then repeat that on the area next to it. And the best thing about watercolouring a heat embossed image is you don't have to worry about bleeding, because that raised embossing keeps the water in that almost like a little well shaped area. And so you can just do any of the areas you want, even the ones next to each other. And you'll see that I'm drawing that line along the inner edge, and then also a little bit where there are creases in that rose created by the stamp itself. So I'm going to speed this up, and I do go back in and add another layer just to deepen the colour a little bit and add a little bit more contrast with my brush marker. You can get some nice effects if you do leave it to dry without pulling it out with water first, and then it will pull it out but be a little bit fainter. And now I'm going to come in, there's a succulent in this heart, so I'm coming in with the limeade, and just this one I'm adding a lot more roughly. I've added water on top, and just smushed it around. And then I'm coming in, I've scribbled a little bit of that earlier colour onto an acetate sheet nearby, and I'm just going to come in with my water brush and add a dot on each of the succulent spikes, and you'll see it wicks out and it creates that nice two-tone look that you often get on succulents. I'm then going to come in with, I think this is the moss on the leaves, and then repeat that first colour again for the other flower. Now the trick I saw Jana do was to create almost like a watercolour image that looks like it's been stamped directly onto dark cardstock. And the way she does this is she goes in and fills in all of the spaces with a dark colour of, well, she used Copic, I'm using this watercolour brush marker because I don't like to use Copics directly onto heat embossing, because sometimes it can affect your Copics. And then go round the outside, and then I'm going to fussy cut this out, leaving a border, and that way I don't have to worry about perfectly trimming out this image, which is quite a challenging image to trim out right against the heat embossing. So I'm leaving that border, and you'll see that where I use that desert night colour, which is actually from the tropical marker set, it has this blue border, and I also filled in some of the spaces in between the flowers. And just to make sure that white core wasn't showing, I went round the outside just with a dark coloured Copic marker. I'm using an A2 size panel of blueberry cardstock from Martha Stewart, and I'm going to dry emboss it with this heart embossing folder from Tailored Expressions. I'm running it through my Gemini Junior and then pull it back out again. It's a great machine, by the way, for dry embossing, the Gemini Junior. You just put that between the two plates and you get perfect embossing every time. And now you'll see when I lay my heart on top that it doesn't look like I fussy cut it out. It's such a cool trick of the eye because that border kind of completely blends in with that background cardstock. And then I've popped it up on some foam squares from Gina Designs. I decided I wanted to add a little bit more interest, and I've already stuck my heart down. So a quick tip for masking off things without having to do a bunch of fussy cutting is to just use the stamp. If you're not splattering anything that would permanently stain the stamp, you can just wipe off. Why not do it this way? And I'm using some rose shimmer spritz. I thought that would tie in nicely with the Rose Glintz embossing powder. That's by Tsukineko. And then you can see you can just lift off that stamp, give it a wipe with a baby wipe, and you're good to go. So for my sentiment, I'm going to use this coordinating sentiment from the set, and this time I'm going to stamp it on some black cardstock, and I'm going to heat emboss it with that Rose Glintz embossing powder again. I just wanted to show you how these emboss onto dark coloured cardstock directly. You can see here that it is semi-translucent, but it does still show up pretty well on the black cardstock. And I'm just going to pop that up off to the side on some foam squares. Now my card panel is just a little bit smaller than an A2 size card, and that was pre-planned so that I could pop it up on foam tape and a bit of fun foam. So I've got some blue fun foam here with some double-sided tape, and then pop it up onto the card base, which is made from that same blueberry cardstock. Now I've gone ahead and watercoloured off camera the Santana rose and coloured around the outside again, just as we did before, and then fussy cut it out. I'm using some of that blueberry cardstock again, and this time I'm using this background stamp. This is, I think it's the Lace Rose or Lace Flowers. I'll link to it down in the description box below, by Gina Designs. And I've inked it completely with my Wow embossing ink, and then I'm going to pop that panel, which I have treated with a powder bag, over the top, pressing down, rubbing my hand all over it just to get a good, nice, clear impression. And then I'm going to heat emboss it. And look at that. It looks like, it's almost like a satin pillow. Do you know those kind of throw pillows? I wasn't expecting it to come out as well as it did. This rose is obviously embossed in the Mayan Glintz, so that's what I also used on the background. And then I'm die cutting it with a stitched rectangle die and then popping it up on some foam strips. And then for the sentiment, this is heat embossed in opaque bright white from Wow onto black cardstock, and it's a sentiment from that same stamp set from Gina Designs, the Santana Rose. And I really like that sentiment. It's I live away from a lot of my friends, and I think it looks great just popped up on that rose and keeping it simple. Thanks so much for watching. Be sure to check out the rest of the videos on the channel. Bye.